Last week we had fire for St Brides Day. Next week we're having water for the Iona service, and then in 2 weeks' time we're doing earth and stewardship. I'm talking then as well, and actually what I'm talking about today and earth and stewardship are really quite coupled together, okay? And there's actually going to be some homework from today to bring forward to next week, because what we're talking about is something that's such a big thing for us and our world that we're not going to get simple answers, one thing to take away at the end of our discussion this morning. The one thing we're going to take away is how much more we need to do and how much we need to think about it. So today is air. We're thinking about global warming and its effect on climate change and our Christian response to that, and particularly in the case of the climate change, the theme of justice. And it's quite deliberate we had a reading from Micah. For those who were here last year for Jonathan's series on Micah and justice, this is helpful groundwork, so we're building on that. Thank you, Jonathan, for doing the hard work earlier. Okay. There is, first of all, we're not starting from scratch. There is quite a lot now of Christian response to climate change. And the front page of this handout is our glorious Church of England actually doing something right for once. To celebrate this moment, this is straight off, verbatim, off the Church of England's website on what should we do to act on climate change. Word for word. You'll see in the middle there, highlighted in yellow, there is good news. I've been married to Miranda for long enough to know that every sermon needs to have some good news in it. Okay? Climate change can seem quite scary and nasty and all bad news. There is good news. There is hope. This is something we can do something about. Okay, so this is going to be sort of 3 parts. We're going to talk about Christian response to climate change. We're also going to talk about what climate change is. And then there's going to be a time to respond in small groups in true St Brides fashion. Okay. The reason I'm going to talk about what climate change is, lots of you here I think will say, yeah, we kind of know this stuff. And then I've been having some conversations in coffee with various people and said, actually, people kind of assume everybody gets it, and we don't really know what it is or why it's happening. So there is a sort of frequently asked questions primer in here, and actually I'm going to start with that. So if you turn to the centre spread, one of the first questions I got asked is, 10 years ago people were talking about global warming, now all the media's talking about climate change. Is it the same thing? Is it anything to do with the ozone layer? What sort of thing, how do these things react? And the answer is, global warming is the mechanism that's the cause of climate change. Climate change is the long-term stuff. The long-term shifts in temperature, long-term shifts in weather patterns, average temperatures rising. Okay. The second question I got asked is, why is global warming happening? What's greenhouse gases? And they're kind of the same question, so I'm going to take them together, okay? This is about as much science as you're ever going to hear in St Brides. Trust me, it is all very straightforward, okay? So when we talk about greenhouse gases, who here has a greenhouse or a conservatory? A few of you? Ever been inside on a nice sunny day? Kind of warm? That's it, people, okay? Right, and the science behind it is kind of stuff we already know. So, on an average day in Liverpool, when you look up straight into the sky, how it's lovely and blue and clear, and then when you look at sunset, it's nice and red, okay, at the sunsets. That's kind of the same thing. So, light from the sun coming through our atmosphere scatters blue light. So when you look up at midday, the blue light scattered around you and the sky looks blue. I know from here to here, you know, air looks pretty see-through. But if you're looking through 200 miles of it, you get a lot of scattering, it looks blue. When you're looking to the sunset, all the blue light's been so scattered it's out of the way and you can only see the red bits. Okay? Right, that light comes down. This graphic's from Wikipedia. Lots of this stuff's from Wikipedia, people. It's out there, it's easy to find if you want to know more. And there are some links on the back, which you'll have to type in because this isn't electronic. We might get a copy on the website. The light comes through the atmosphere, and it comes through as light. You know, light's in lots of different colours, hits the Earth and warms it up, just like in a greenhouse. And the air in the greenhouse starts warming up because the light, because the warmth then radiates back out. But there's molecules in the atmosphere that start dancing when they get heat, and they scatter the heat throughout. And the dancing is what's trapping it. There isn't a layer of glass on top of the atmosphere, but molecules like carbon dioxide and methane and water vapour capture that dancing captures the heat. The light comes through and then it gets bounced back as heat, and that stays in. Like having a lovely great big duvet over the Earth. And mainly, the greenhouse effect is lovely. There is a natural greenhouse effect, and thank God, literally, because without it, it would be minus 19 degrees C. Not, you know, average temperature, like 30 degrees C, colder across. So the greenhouse effect keeps Earth habitable, okay? It's a good thing in natural balance, and like lots of good things in natural balance, what we've done with God's creation, this is a bit of sort of Garden of Eden stuff. We've messed up God's creation a bit, and we've messed up God's creation because we're chucking out more greenhouse gases, and the most important one of which is carbon dioxide. And the reason carbon dioxide is the most important one is because there's lots of it, because we get carbon dioxide when we burn stuff. And we've done an awful lot of burning of wood and coal and oil. And we've done that throughout history, but in the past there weren't quite so many humans, and we didn't burn so much stuff. The last couple of 100 years, there's a lot more of us, and we're burning a lot more. Now, it's not just about burning stuff. The other really important gas is methane, from cows farting and belching. And methane is a lot dancier than carbon dioxide, but there's less of it. So methane's important, and this is why you'll have started hearing a whole dynamic about eating less meat, because ruminant animals, cows principally, and our increasing love of eating red meat and dairy products around the world is definitely increasing the amount of methane and adding to the greenhouse effect. We're going to talk more about that in 2 weeks' time when we talk about resources. I told you they're kind of linked. Okay. So, that's the first primer of the greenhouse effect. The next question that's been asked is, so what's the evidence? And there's a lot of climate change denial around, and we'll come on to that in a bit. The evidence is pretty good. There's temperature measurements, there's tree rings, there's ice cores. In ice cores, we not only have trapped ice bubbles to see the effects, we can measure sea level rise by satellites bouncing lasers and other things down from space. So there's a map there from NASA of sea level rise. It's measurable. It's like that much around the world in general. But in some places it's this much. It's uneven. We've also been mapping from space the Arctic sea ice, and there's a nice little graphic on NASA. I've picked 2 years. I picked 2 years because they're particularly dramatic, because it goes a little bit more and less each year. So there's a little bit of fiddling here from Phil. Okay, but you know, it's half the size it was 30 years ago, people. It's a really, really big thing. And you know, I started running out of space, and I knew I'd run out of time this morning. Go and look at some of those links. You can get similar pictures. You know, glaciers that were there when we were children are halfway up the valley now. We're already seeing the effects of climate change on weather. And weather's the short-term stuff. Weather's what we get when we go outside. How did somebody describe it? Weather's like whether I put a coat on today. Climate is what wardrobe do I need? Okay, the sort of what do I buy? You're already seeing more extreme weather effects, and we will see more and more of them because we're messing up God's creation. Okay, there were another couple of questions that I got asked, so turn over the page. One of them, before Christmas, there was a big report out on 1.5 degrees C. It came out from something called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which, for obvious reasons, is normally shortened to IPCC. Okay? And somebody said afterwards, so what's the IPCC? So I thought I'd answer that one. It's the UN body that advises governments. Okay? So this is the kind of respected voice. Another question I got asked is, 1.5 degrees C doesn't seem like much. And it kind of doesn't seem like much to us, because we can take our jumpers off, we can move. If you're ice, you can't move away, you melt. So glaciers and Arctic and Antarctic ice sheets melt, and they melt into the sea, so the sea level rises. And if you're a mangrove forest, or a very poor fisherman in Bangladesh, you can't move, you can't afford to move, you've got nowhere to go. If the sea levels rise, you get flooded. You die, or your livelihood goes, and then you die. So this is an issue to the natural world and to humans. 1.5 degrees C is a pretty big deal if you're coral as well. We're seeing huge coral bleaching already at about 1 degree C temperature rise. 1.5 degrees C, it's borderline whether we're going to kill all the coral. We'll probably get to 2 degrees C. We're pretty much going to lose coral reefs unless we do something very big, very quickly. And that matters, as my son told me over breakfast. He said, so why is coral reefs important? And I said, well, just you need biodiversity. It's good for the planet. He said, and also, Dad, coral reefs, apart from being the livelihood of lots of people around the world and buffering the effects of strong tides in all sorts of island communities, they also filter the water and keep it clean. Without them, we wouldn't have clean water. There's lots of sort of connections between things. It's also true that 1.5 degrees C doesn't mean 1.5 degrees C everywhere. It's really not uniform. And actually, you're going to have to flick back because not everything goes in a brilliant thing. This is on the second page. There's some graphics about how uneven it is. I'll come back to that when we talk about when we go on to talk about justice. Okay. I also got asked, wouldn't it be great if Britain was a bit warmer? This was a couple of weeks ago when the heating wasn't working. And it's nay, nay and thrice nay, I'm afraid. So the problem with the UK getting warmer is just because it's warming around the world doesn't necessarily mean that we here get warmer. And there's a big issue with the Gulf Stream. What keeps Britain and Western Europe nice and toasty is a big stream of water that comes over from the Caribbean. Otherwise, that climate would be like Canada, be kind of chilly. And there are these things called climate tipping points where things can turn off like that, or they can start going the other way, and suddenly it'll get a lot colder. And is that a risk? And the answer is, we don't know, because they've not happened before. And we don't know, we don't know how much warming is safe. The answer is, no warming is safe. We've already done it, and we're going to do some more. The question is, how can we limit it? The thrice nay in what would be good if the UK was warmer is, we'll come back to that on justice, okay? I've put in a bit about hope here, about, somebody asked about, how Britain's doing relative to, I'm equating Britain and the UK here, and I'll probably say England at some point and annoy Scots and Welsh people. Sorry, my bad. Broadly, Britain is currently not doing badly on a global scale of piss poor performance, okay? So, yes, we have cut emissions, but when we go back and talk about justice, which I'm going to do next, we've got a lot of ground to make up, okay? So there is hope. It shows we can do something about it, but by God, we should not be resting on our laurels. And then there's, this is out of climate change denials. There's a classic trope in climate change denials
that there was a little ice age a couple of hundred years ago. You may remember seeing pictures of people skating on the Thames. And doesn't this disprove climate change is man-made? Just this last month, some researchers come out, 3 researchers from UCL, 1 from Leeds University, showing actually, no. It turns out the Little Ice Age was also man-made climate change, just earlier than everybody's seen it. So when largely the Spanish and Portuguese went over to Central and South America, starting in the sort of 14th, 15th centuries, the disease they brought and their active genocide killed 90% of the population. The population went from 60 million to 6 million in under 100 years. And the effect of that was lots of their agricultural land collapsed and it got reforested. An area about the size of France, over a couple of hundred years, reforested. And we can see the effect on the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. It dropped about 10 ppm. That's about 3 years at current rate. And the effect of that was enough to, there are some natural cycles, natural ripples in the climate, and that was enough to amplify it and cause the Little Ice Age. That should tell us 2 things. One is climate change deniers are wrong. The other thing it tells us is we just don't know how sensitive the climate is, because a little thing like that, that's like 3 years of our current emission, triggers a Little Ice Age. The environment is so sensitive. We kind of think of the Earth as being this great big thing. It is, but it's also lots of us, so all our little things add up to great big pushes on it, and it can't take it. And then every so often in the media you kind of see people say, can't we just do technological fixes? Can't we just suck the gas out of the atmosphere? And the answer is, boy, you have no idea of the size of this problem. So take that example just done. We reforested an area the size of France by accident, and it led over 100 years or so, sucked out about as much carbon dioxide as we're generating in 3 years. Even if we reforested the entire world, it would not be enough to make up the amount of coal and oil we're burning. We've got to stop doing as much of it. Okay. So that leads us on to the back page. The IPCC has been around for a generation, 31 years. We've been warned about this since before the Berlin Wall came down. And why haven't we done anything about it? For those who are at the book group, human propensity to fuck things up, people. Sin. We have acted like lobsters in the cooking pot. It's tomorrow's problem, tomorrow's problems are for tomorrow's people. In unenlightened self-interest. It's hard. We've understood a lot more in the last 30 years, but it's still hard for people to get their heads around. There's lots of complex trade-offs and no easy answers, and we do not like things that don't have easy answers. So, roundabout, I realise I put this together in the wrong order. Back to this page. What's our Christian response to this? And why is this about justice? First thing you'll see is this world map here. This is from Moody's, the credit rating agency, who are, the green bits are countries that, do you know what, they're rich enough or insulated enough from the effects of climate change, they're not going to have too much trouble. The red bits are the people who are in real trouble, because either they're going to see the effects of climate change more, and or they're poorer and can't do much about it. You notice how the red bits are India, Africa, the yellow bits, South America, okay? Green bits, Europe, Russia, US. Okay, go over onto that side. There are 3 things showing who's to blame for this, okay? Now, whilst it is true that we're not going to get out the current mess, whilst Americans drive in a great big gas-guzzling SUV 50 miles to eat a burger, we can't blame it on the Americans, okay, people. I was quite surprised on this. Our national responsibility for this, so this is atmospheric carbon dioxide emitted over time per person. So it hasn't come out great in the photocopy. 1950 to 2000, Britain's pretty orange. Look down to the middle one, 1750 to 2009. Again, it's not great in the photocopy. I've got this as a lovely graphic on the computer if anybody wants to see it afterwards, which goes every year from 1750. Britain's bright red on there, people, and it was bright red from 1900 when nowhere else in the world was. And then the really disturbing one, which I found buried down at Wikipedia and then graphed because the numbers in the table didn't make sense until you did, is so between 1850 and 2008, how much carbon dioxide per person emitted by people in different countries? We in Britain are right up there with America. And yes, those numbers will have changed. China will have come up, yeah. But you can see why, if you're somebody in Brazil and we say, can't you not chop down your trees? Then they get pretty mad and say, well, yeah, if you pay us for it. Because you and I have benefited from living in Britain, being educated in Britain, all the social services in Britain, however much the current government's destroying them. We're a hell of a lot better living in a rich country. And we're in a rich country because historically we had the Industrial Revolution first and all sorts of other injustices. And now this is hitting home. And the reason why the Christian response to this is, I'm saying here, primarily a justice thing, is the people who are going to pay the price for this are primarily the poor of the world. And they're not us so much as our children and our children's children, because the gas we put in the atmosphere is going to stay around for generations to come, long after we're all gone. Now, yeah, some of this was done before we were born, but we, the current generation, actually have a responsibility to do something about that. And that's why, turning to the back, in bright yellow, the question is, what can I do now? And rather than sort of preaching at you some of the answers that are there, I want you to start doing the work. Because I'm sure you've all actually heard enough in the media to know some of the things you can do. So we're going to start this now, and then we're going to continue it in 2 weeks' time when you've had some more time to think about it. But I'd like you to get people around you in 2s and 3s and actually talk about what you're going to change to try and tackle this huge, great catastrophe of climate change.